The dust from the approaching stagecoach billowed across Prosperity, Colorado like a churning golden tide as it rattled into town on that scorching afternoon in August 1875. The townsfolk gathered along Main Street, fanning themselves and squinting against the summer glare, eagerly awaiting the new arrivals. Prosperity had been living up to its name lately, with the silver mines in the nearby mountains bringing wealth and opportunity to those lucky or shrewd enough to stake their claims. Katherine Blackwood clutched her worn carpetbag as she stepped down from the stagecoach, her threadbare dress hanging limply from her slender frame. The faded blue calico had once been fine, but years of wear had left it patched and thin. Her boots were scuffed beyond repair, the soles barely attached. The only thing that shone about her was her eyes, bright, determined hazel eyes that surveyed the town with careful assessment. Lord have mercy, what washed up in Prosperity today? A woman's voice rang out, followed by tittering laughter. Katherine lifted her chin slightly, refusing to acknowledge the mockery. She'd heard worse in the 2 months since she'd left Boston, traveling west with nothing but a name scribbled on a piece of paper and the desperate hope of finding her uncle's mining claim. "Reckon she's come to work at Sally's place," another voice called out, referring to the local brothel. The laughter grew louder as Katherine stepped onto the wooden boardwalk, her face burning with humiliation but her spine straight as steel. She'd weathered too much to break now. "That'll be enough," a deep voice commanded, cutting through the laughter like a knife. The crowd parted as Kieran Daniels strode forward. At 32, he was one of the most respected men in Prosperity, not for his wealth, though his cattle ranch was doing well enough, but for his fairness and quiet strength. His hat cast a shadow over steel-blue eyes, his face weathered from years under the Colorado sun, and a week's growth of beard darkened his jaw. "Madam," he said with a respectful nod to Katherine, "welcome to Prosperity." "She ain't exactly Prosperity's poster child, Kieran," hollered Bart Wilson from the doorway of his general store. "Look at those rags." Kieran turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the laughing faces until they fell silent under his steady regard. "She's rich enough for me," he said simply. Then, turning back to Katherine, "Do you have somewhere to stay, miss?" Katherine's throat tightened at the unexpected kindness. "I'm looking for Jacob Blackwood's claim. He was my uncle." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jacob Blackwood had struck a rich vein in his mine 3 months ago, only to die of fever a few weeks later. The claim had been in limbo since, with various parties eyeing it greedily. "Jacob was a good man," Kieran said, "and if you're his kin, that claim's rightfully yours." He nodded toward the end of the street. "My sister runs the boarding house. I'll walk you there, miss." "Katherine Blackwood," she replied, extending a gloved hand that had once been fine but was now darned in several places. Kieran took her hand briefly, his calloused palm warm against her fingers. "Kieran Daniels. My ranch is just outside town." As they walked down the street, Katherine could feel the stares following them, but Kieran's tall figure beside her provided an unexpected shield. For the first time since leaving Boston, she didn't feel quite so alone. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your intervention." Kieran shrugged. "Folks here can be quick to judge. Most are good people underneath." "You defended me without knowing who I was," Katherine pointed out. "A person's worth isn't in their clothes," Kieran replied, guiding her around a muddy patch in the street. "My pa taught me that. He came west with nothing but the shirt on his back and built something worth having." Katherine studied him from the corner of her eye. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the Boston men she'd known, with their smooth hands and tailored suits. Kieran Daniels was rugged, his face weathered by sun and wind, his hands bearing the marks of hard work. But there was something compelling about him, a quiet dignity that drew her eye. "Here we are," he said as they reached a 2-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a sign that read Prosperity Boarding House. "Kathleen runs a clean place. She'll treat you fair." The door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman with the same steel blue eyes as Kieran, though her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun. "Bringing me strays again, Kieran?" she asked, though her smile was kind. "Miss Blackwood here is Jacob's niece," Kieran explained. "Just arrived to claim her inheritance." Kathleen's eyes widened. "Jacob's niece?" She looked Katherine over with new interest. "Well, you're welcome here, Miss Blackwood. Come in out of this heat." "Thank you," Katherine said, stepping inside. The boarding house was simple but immaculately clean, with polished floors and curtains that smelled of sunshine. "I'll come by tomorrow," Kieran said from the doorway. "Help you sort out the claim paperwork if you'd like." Katherine turned back to him, struck by his continued kindness. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Daniels, Kieran," he corrected. "And it's no trouble. Jacob was a friend." With a tip of his hat, he turned and walked back into the bright afternoon sun. Kathleen showed Katherine to a small but neat room on the second floor. "Bathrooms down the hall. Dinner's at 6. You'll want to wash up before then." Left alone, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed her shoulders to slump. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with uncertainty and fear. When her father's investments had failed and he'd taken his own life, leaving her with nothing but debts, she'd remembered her mother's brother who'd gone west years ago. A letter to the Prosperity postmaster had confirmed he'd struck silver, but had recently died. With creditors closing in, Katherine had sold what little she could to finance her journey west. Her fine dresses and jewelry had gone first, leaving her with only the most practical garments, which had deteriorated over the hard journey. She pulled out the creased letter from the Prosperity town clerk confirming her uncle's death and the existence of his mine. It was her only hope now. If she could make the mine pay, she might rebuild her life. If not, she pushed the thought away. She couldn't fail. She had nowhere else to go. After washing away the dust of travel in the small bathroom, Katherine changed into her one remaining dress that wasn't completely worn through. It was a simple navy blue cotton, once her traveling dress, now faded and mended in several places. Still, it was clean, and with her hair freshly pinned up, she felt more herself than she had in weeks. Dinner at the boarding house was a simple but hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. The other boarders, 2 mining engineers, a schoolteacher, and an elderly widow, regarded Katherine with curiosity but were polite enough. Kathleen kept the conversation flowing, and Katherine was grateful not to field too many questions about her past. "So you're claiming Jacob's mine?" one of the engineers, a Mr. Pearson, asked as they finished their apple pie. "It's my uncle's property, and as his only living relative, yes," Katherine replied firmly. "It's a promising claim," Mr. Pearson acknowledged, "but mining's a rough business for a lady. You might consider selling." "I might," Katherine said noncommittally, "once I've assessed its value properly." "Smart," the other engineer, Mr. Thompson, nodded. "Don't let anyone rush you. There are those in town who take advantage." "My brother will help her sort things out," Kathleen said with finality, effectively ending the conversation. Later, as Katherine prepared for bed, she stood by the window looking out at the town. Prosperity was nothing like Boston, with its cobblestone streets and gas lamps. Here, the buildings were more humble, the streets unpaved, and beyond the edge of town, the wild landscape stretched endlessly under a vast, star-filled sky. It was beautiful in its own way and terrifying in its openness. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Blackwood." Kathleen's voice called softly. "May I come in?" Katherine opened the door to find Kieran's sister holding a bundle of fabric. "I thought you might need these," Kathleen said, placing the bundle on the bed. "Just some dresses I don't wear much anymore. We're about the same size, I think." Katherine's eyes stung with unexpected tears. "I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Kathleen interrupted. "We women need to stick together out here. Besides, you can pay me back when your mind starts producing." Katherine fingered the simple but well-made dresses of brown wool, a green cotton, and a blue gingham. "Thank you, truly." Kathleen smiled. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee and bacon. Katherine dressed in Kathleen's brown wool dress, which fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist. After a hearty breakfast, she was just helping clear the dishes when Kieran arrived. "Morning, ladies," he greeted, hat in hand. He wore a clean white shirt today, tucked into dark pants, his gun belt slung low on his hips. His eyes swept over Katherine, noting the different dress, but he made no comment. "Right on time," Kathleen said. "Coffee before you go. Already had 2 cups at home," Kieran declined. "Ready, Miss Blackwood," Katherine nodded, gathering the papers she'd need. "Yes, thank you." They walked together down the main street toward the assayer's office, which doubled as the mining claim registry. The morning was still cool, the sun not yet high enough to bake the dust. "That's a nice color on you," Kieran commented, nodding at her dress. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "Your sister was kind enough to lend me a few things." "Kathleen's good that way," Kieran agreed. "Been taking care of strays since we were kids." "Is that what I am, a stray?" Katherine asked, uncertain whether to be amused or offended. Kieran's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Aren't we all out here? Everyone comes west for a reason." "What was yours?" Katherine asked, genuinely curious. "Freedom," Kieran answered simply. "Pa brought us out after Ma died. Said the East was too crowded with memories." "I was 12, Kathleen 14. Grew up learning to ranch, decided I liked the life." Before Katherine could respond, they reached a brick building with a sign reading Morgan's Assay Office and Mining Claims. Inside, a balding man with spectacles looked up from his ledger. "Kieran," he greeted, then his eyes fixed on Katherine. "And you must be Jacob Blackwood's niece. Word travels fast in prosperity." "Katherine Blackwood," she confirmed, stepping forward to shake his hand. "I've come to claim my uncle's property." "Henry Morgan," he introduced himself. "I processed the ore samples from Jacob's strike. Very promising, but there are procedures for claiming inheritance." For the next hour, Katherine navigated a sea of paperwork, grateful for Kieran's steady presence and occasional guidance. When Mr. Morgan mentioned the need for witnesses to verify her identity, Kieran immediately offered himself and the town doctor, who had treated Jacob. "There's also the matter of back taxes and claim maintenance fees," Mr. Morgan added, pushing his spectacles up his nose. Katherine's heart sank. She'd spent nearly everything getting to prosperity. "How much?" Mr. Morgan named a sum that made her stomach clench. It wasn't insurmountable, but it would take most of her remaining funds. "Can she pay in installments?" Kieran asked, sensing her distress. "Not officially, Mr. Morgan hedged, but given the circumstances, I might be able to accept partial payment now and the rest within 30 days, provided the claim shows production." "I'll have the money," Katherine assured him, though she wasn't entirely certain how. Once outside, Katherine took a deep breath, fighting back the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. 30 days to get a mine producing a mine she hadn't even seen yet. "Don't fret," Kieran said, accurately reading her expression. "Jacob was already pulling silver out. The hard part's done." "I know nothing about mining," Katherine admitted. "You don't have to," Kieran assured her. "You hire men who do. I can introduce you to some honest workers." "Why are you helping me?" Katherine asked suddenly, turning to face him on the boardwalk. Kieran considered her question seriously. "Jacob was a good man. He talked about his sister, sometimes your mother. He'd want his kin to have what he worked for." He paused. "And I know what it's like to start over with nothing." His honesty disarmed her. "Thank you. I won't forget your kindness." "No need for that," Kieran said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Let's head to the Silver Spur for lunch. We can talk about what comes next." The Silver Spur Saloon was Prosperity's most respectable establishment, serving meals as well as drinks. As they entered, conversations dimmed momentarily as people noticed Katherine, now dressed more presentably but still the subject of town gossip. "Ignore them," Kieran murmured, guiding her to a corner table. They ordered stew and cornbread, and as they ate, Kieran outlined what she'd need to do to get the mine operational again. "It'll need cleaning out, been sitting empty since Jacob took sick," he explained. "Probably need to check the supports, make sure everything's safe. Then hire about 5 men to start, more as production increases." "And where do I find trustworthy men?" Katherine asked. "I know a few," Kieran said. "And there's Tom Bailey, he was Jacob's foreman. Good man, knows the mine better than anyone." As they talked, a burly man approached their table, his expensive suit and gold watch marking him as someone of means. "Miss Blackwood," he greeted with a thin smile. "Victor Holloway. I own the Golden Eagle mine." Katherine nodded politely. "Mr. Holloway." "I understand you've inherited Jacob's claim," Holloway continued. "I'd like to make you an offer, save you the trouble of mining it yourself." "I haven't decided to sell," Katherine replied carefully. Holloway's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mining is a difficult business, Miss Blackwood. Dangerous, expensive. My offer would give you enough to live comfortably, perhaps even return east. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Holloway, but I intend to assess the mine's value myself before making any decisions." Holloway's expression hardened slightly. "As you wish. But my offer won't remain open indefinitely." With a curt nod to Kieran, he walked away. "Vulture," Kieran muttered. "Been trying to buy up every claim in the area." "Is his offer likely to be fair?" Katherine asked. "Not a chance," Kieran said flatly. "He knows Jacob hit a rich vein. He'd pay you a fraction of its worth." After lunch, Kieran suggested they visit the mine the next day. "It's about an hour's ride. I can borrow a gentle mare for you." "I'd appreciate that," Katherine said, remembering the side-saddle lessons of her youth. "I should warn you, I haven't ridden in some time." "You'll do fine," Kieran assured her. "I'll pick you up at 8 tomorrow." That evening, Katherine sat with Kathleen on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Your brother has been very helpful," Katherine remarked. Kathleen smiled knowingly. "Kieran's always had a soft spot for those in need, but he doesn't usually escort them all over town." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "He's merely being neighborly." "Of course," Kathleen agreed, though her eyes twinkled. "He's a good man, my brother, too long alone if you ask me." "Was he ever married?" Katherine asked before she could stop herself. "No," Kathleen replied. "There was a girl years back, Mary Sullivan. They were sweet on each other, but she took sick the winter of '67. Consumption." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. Kathleen nodded. "Kieran threw himself into the ranch after that, built it up from almost nothing. He's done well, but a man needs more than cattle and land." Katherine didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject, asking about the other residents of Prosperity. As Kathleen described the town and its people, Katherine found herself wondering about the mine and what tomorrow would bring. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. Katherine dressed in Kathleen's green cotton dress, which she'd modified slightly for riding, and plaited her hair tightly to keep it from the wind. Kieran arrived promptly at 8, leading 2 horses, his own bay gelding and a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "Morning," he greeted, his eyes taking in her riding attire with approval. "Ready to see your property?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Katherine replied, trying to hide her nervousness. Kieran helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The side saddle felt strange after so many years, but her body remembered the posture. Once she was settled, Kieran swung easily onto his own horse. "The mine's up in those foothills," he said, pointing to the mountains that rose west of town. "Good trail all the way." As they rode, Katherine marveled at the landscape. The vast open spaces, the towering mountains, the clarity of the air, all so different from Boston's crowded streets and sooty skies. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Gets in your blood," Kieran agreed. "Can't imagine living anywhere else now." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the horses' hooves making a rhythmic sound on the hard, packed trail. Katherine found herself studying Kieran's profile against the backdrop of mountains and sky. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy that she'd rarely encountered in the men of her previous life. "Tell me about Boston," Kieran said eventually. "What was your life like there?" Katherine hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It was different. My father was in banking. We lived in a fine house on Beacon Hill. I had the usual education for a young lady: music, French, watercolors." She paused. "It all seems very far away now." "What happened?" Kieran asked gently. Katherine stared straight ahead. "My father made some poor investments. When the panic of '73 hit, he lost everything. He couldn't face the disgrace." She swallowed hard. "After the funeral, the creditors took what was left. I remembered my uncle had gone west years ago. A letter to Prosperity confirmed he'd struck silver but had recently died." "So you came to claim your inheritance," Kieran nodded. "Took courage making that journey alone." "It was that or become a governess," Katherine said with a small smile. "And I've never been particularly good with children." Kieran chuckled. "Well, there's plenty of opportunity out here for a woman with spirit." The trail began to climb, winding through stands of pine and aspen. An hour after leaving town, they crested a ridge, and Kieran pointed to a clearing ahead where rough wooden buildings clustered around what was clearly a mine entrance. "There it is," he said. "The Silver Lady." "The Silver Lady," Katherine repeated. "That's what Jacob called it," Kieran explained. "Said she was fickle but generous when she was in the mood." They rode into the clearing, and Katherine took in the small cabin, the shed that housed mining equipment, and the tunnel entrance reinforced with heavy timbers. It looked abandoned but intact. Kieran helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Katherine felt a strange flutter in her stomach at his proximity, the scent of leather and pine that clung to him. "Let's check the cabin first," Kieran suggested, tethering the horses. The cabin was simple but solid: one room with a bed, table, chairs, and a pot-bellied stove. Dust covered everything, but otherwise it seemed in good repair. "Jacob lived here when he was working the mine," Kieran explained. "It's not fancy, but it's sturdy." "It's better than I expected," Katherine admitted, running a finger along the table. Next, they examined the equipment shed. Mining tools hung neatly on the walls: picks, shovels, hammers, lanterns. A small ore cart sat in one corner, its metal wheels slightly rusted. "Everything looks to be here," Kieran said. Jacob was methodical about his tools. Finally, they approached the mine entrance. Kieran lit a lantern before they entered, the flame casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. "Stay close," he warned. "The main shaft is safe enough, but I don't want to go too deep without proper checks." The tunnel sloped gently downward, the air growing cooler as they descended. Wooden supports braced the walls and ceiling every few feet. About 50 yards in, Kieran stopped and held his lantern higher, illuminating a vein of dark rock shot through with gleaming silver. "There's your silver," he said softly. "Jacob's last strike." Katherine stared at the metallic threads running through the rock. This was her inheritance, this dark hole in the ground with its hidden treasure. It seemed both miraculous and daunting. "How do I even begin?" she whispered. "One step at a time," Kieran replied. "First, we get Tom Bailey out here to check the supports and make sure everything's safe. Then hire a crew. Within a week you could be pulling ore." The confidence in his voice steadied her. "You make it sound possible." "It is possible," Kieran assured her. "Jacob did the hard part, finding the vein. Now it's just about getting the silver out." They returned to the surface, blinking in the bright sunlight. Katherine looked around at the mine, her mind with new eyes. "I could live in the cabin," she mused. "While the mine gets started." Kieran frowned. "It's isolated up here, might not be safe for a woman alone." "I can't afford to stay at the boarding house indefinitely," Katherine pointed out. "Let's cross that bridge when we come to it," Kieran suggested. "For now, let's head back to town and find Tom Bailey." As they rode back to Prosperity, Katherine's mind whirled with plans and possibilities. The mine represented more than just financial security. It was a chance to build something of her own, to prove she could survive without the safety net of her former life. And if she occasionally glanced at the strong line of Kieran's shoulders as he rode ahead of her, she told herself it was merely appreciation for his help, nothing more. Tom Bailey was found at the Silver Spur, a weathered man in his 50s with a grizzled beard and eyes that had seen their share of hardship. He greeted Kieran warmly and looked Katherine over with frank assessment. "So you're Jacob's niece," he said. "Got his eyes, you do." "You worked with my uncle?" Katherine asked. 5 years, Bailey confirmed. "Good man, fair boss. That last strike was something to see. Richest vein I've worked in 20 years of mining." "I need someone who knows the mine," Katherine said directly. "Someone I can trust to run things properly." Bailey studied her face. "Jacob spoke of his sister sometimes, said she had grit. Seems you inherited that along with the mine." He nodded slowly. "I'll help you get it running again, for Jacob's sake and because that silver deserves to see the light of day." They spent the next hour discussing practicalities, how many men they'd need, what equipment required repair, how soon they could start production. By the time they finished, Katherine felt a glimmer of real hope for the first time in months. "If all goes well, we could be processing ore within 2 weeks, Bailey concluded. "Enough to meet your tax payment at any rate." "I'll head up there tomorrow," he added. "Check the supports, make sure everything's sound. Then start hiring the next day if that suits you, madam." "That would be perfect, Mr. Bailey," Katherine agreed. As they left the saloon, Victor Holloway stepped into their path, his expression less friendly than before. "Miss Blackwood," he greeted coldly. "I see you're moving forward with the mine." "I am," Katherine confirmed. Holloway's eyes flickered to Bailey, then Kieran. "Mining is a risky business. Accidents happen. My offer to purchase still stands." "And my answer remains the same," Katherine replied, straightening her spine. "The mine is not for sale." "You should reconsider," Holloway pressed. "A woman alone, she's not alone," Kieran interrupted, his voice hard. "She has friends in Prosperity." Holloway's mouth tightened. "Very well. But remember, Miss Blackwood, silver prices fluctuate. What seems valuable today may be worthless tomorrow." With a curt nod, he walked away. "Charming man," Katherine remarked dryly. "He's worried," Bailey said. "Jacob's vein is rich and it runs toward Holloway's property line. He wants to control it all." "Well, he won't," Katherine said firmly. "The Silver Lady is mine and I intend to make her prosper." The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Bailey inspected the mine and declared it sound, though some supports needed reinforcement. He hired 4 experienced miners and work began in earnest. Katherine divided her time between the mine and town, learning everything she could about the business. She studied ore samples with Mr. Morgan, pored over Jacob's ledgers, and spent hours observing the miners at work. Each evening, exhausted but determined, she would return to the boarding house and record the day's progress in a new ledger. Kieran was a constant presence, offering advice, introducing her to the right people, occasionally stepping in when others might have tried to take advantage of her inexperience. Though he had his own ranch to run, he seemed to find time to help her navigate the complexities of her new life. On the 8th day after her arrival in prosperity, the first cart of ore was processed at Morgan's assay office. The silver content was even higher than expected, and Katherine felt a surge of triumph as Mr. Morgan calculated the value. "At this grade, Miss Blackwood, you'll have no trouble meeting your tax obligation," he assured her. "In fact, you're looking at a very profitable operation." That evening, Kathleen insisted on a small celebration at the boarding house, cooking a special dinner and even producing a bottle of wine. The other boarders joined in, raising glasses to Katherine's success. "To the Silver Lady," Mr. Pearson toasted, and her worthy owner, Katherine blushed with pleasure, unused to such open approval. "Thank you all. I couldn't have done it without your help and guidance." Later, as she sat on the porch enjoying the cool evening air, Kieran joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Congratulations," he said, handing her a steaming cup. "You've accomplished more in a week than most newcomers do in a month." "Thanks to you," Katherine acknowledged. "I'd still be floundering without your help." Kieran shook his head. "I just pointed the way, you did the work." He hesitated. "Jacob would be proud. He always said his sister's daughter had her mother's spirit." "He knew about me?" Katherine asked, surprised. "Your mother wrote to him occasionally," Kieran explained. "Sent a photograph once you as a little girl. He kept it in his cabin." Katherine's eyes stung. "I wish I'd known him. Mother rarely spoke of her brother after he went west." "Different worlds," Kieran nodded. "East and west. Hard to bridge sometimes." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Katherine was acutely aware of Kieran beside her, his presence both comforting and unsettling in ways she didn't fully understand. "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about moving to the cabin. The mine needs daily supervision and the ride back and forth takes valuable time." Kieran frowned. "It's isolated up there." "The miners are there during the day," Katherine pointed out, "and I'm not helpless. I can learn to use a gun if necessary." "It's not just safety," Kieran argued. "It's propriety. A single woman living alone at a mining camp." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "I think we're past concerns about my reputation, don't you? Half the town already thinks I'm destitute, the other half thinks I'm a fortune hunter." "I don't care what they think," Kieran said, his voice suddenly intense. "I care about you." The words hung between them, more revealing than perhaps he'd intended. Katherine's heart beat faster as she met his gaze. "I'm not afraid of hard work or solitude," she said softly. "And I need to make this mine succeed." Kieran sighed, recognizing her determination. "At least let me help you get the cabin in order first. It needs a proper cleaning, maybe some repairs." "I'd appreciate that," Katherine agreed, relieved he wasn't going to argue further. 2 days later, they rode up to the mine together, bringing supplies to ready the cabin for habitation. The miners were already at work, the sounds of picks and shovels echoing from the tunnel. Tom Bailey greeted them with good news. They'd extended the main shaft another 10 feet, and the vein was holding strong. Katherine and Kieran spent the morning cleaning the cabin, sweeping away dust and cobwebs, washing the windows and airing out the bedding. By midday, the small space was transformed. simple but clean and welcoming. As they ate a lunch of bread, cheese, and apples on the cabin's small porch, Katherine felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. The mountain air was crisp and clear, the view spectacular, and for the first time she could envision a future here. "It's not Boston," Kieran remarked, watching her survey her domain. "No," Katherine agreed. "It's better in many ways." She turned to him. "In Boston, I was always Katherine Blackwood, Daniel Blackwood's daughter. Here, I'm just Katherine, free to succeed or fail on my own merits." "Is that what you want? To be judged solely on your own merits? Isn't that what everyone wants, to be seen for who they truly are?" Kieran studied her face. "And who are you, Katherine Blackwood?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm still figuring that out," she admitted. "I know I'm not the pampered society girl I was raised to be, that Katherine couldn't have survived the journey west or taken on a silver mine." "You're stronger than you look," Kieran observed. "Necessity makes us discover strengths we didn't know we had," Katherine replied. "When my father died and everything was lost, I could have sought charity from former friends or accepted a marriage proposal from a man who pitied me. Instead, I chose this. A harder path," Kieran noted. "But my own," Katherine said firmly. After lunch, Kieran helped her install a new lock on the cabin door, then showed her how to use the small pistol he'd brought for her protection. "Plant your feet like this," he instructed, standing behind her to adjust her stance. His proximity sent a tremor through her that had nothing to do with the weight of the gun in her hands. "Steady your right hand with your left," he continued, his voice close to her ear. "Sight along the barrel. Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger." The pistol kicked in her hands as she fired, the shot loud in the mountain stillness. Her bullet struck the tree they were using as a target, several inches from the mark Kieran had indicated but still on the trunk. "Good," he approved. "Again." By the sixth shot, Katherine was hitting closer to the center, her confidence growing with each attempt. "You're a quick study," Kieran said as she reloaded under his guidance. "I've always been a good student," Katherine replied, "though my finishing school never offered marksmanship lessons." Kieran chuckled. "Somehow I think you'll manage just fine up here." They practiced until Katherine felt comfortable with the weapon, then Kieran showed her how to clean and store it properly. "Always keep it loaded and within reach," he advised. "Hopefully, you'll never need it, but better to be prepared." As the afternoon waned, they finished their preparations. Katherine would move her few belongings to the cabin the next day, ready to begin her new life as a mine owner in earnest. "I'll check on you regularly," Kieran promised as they prepared to ride back to town. "And Bailey will be here with the men every day." "I'll be fine," Katherine assured him, touched by his concern. Kieran hesitated, then said, "There's a social at the church Saturday evening. Dance and potluck dinner. Would you consider attending?" "With me?" The invitation surprised her. "Are you asking to court me, Mr. Daniels?" she teased, though her heart beat faster at the prospect. Kieran's tanned face flushed slightly. "I'm asking you to dance, Miss Blackwood." "We can discuss courting after I see if you'll step on my toes." Katherine laughed, delighted by his humor and the warmth in his eyes. "In that case, I accept. Though I should warn you, I was considered quite accomplished at the waltz in Boston." "We'll see if Boston dancing translates to prosperity," Kieran grinned. "Our fiddler's enthusiastic, if not always on key." The ride back to town seemed shorter somehow, filled with easy conversation and occasional laughter. Katherine found herself looking forward to Saturday with an anticipation that had nothing to do with mining or business. The next day, Katherine moved into the cabin, bringing her few possessions and some additional supplies from town. The miners seemed surprised to find their boss taking up residence, but quickly adjusted to her presence. By the end of the week, She had settled into a routine, rising at dawn to review the previous day's progress before the men arrived, spending the day overseeing operations, and evening studying Jacob's notes and planning the mine's development. On Saturday, she rode down to town early. Her saddlebags containing the blue dress Kathleen had lent her the nicest of the three and the few toiletries she possessed. Kathleen welcomed her warmly, insisting she use the boarding house's bathtub and helping her arrange her hair in a simple but flattering style. "My brother hasn't escorted a lady to a social in years," Kathleen remarked as she pinned a final strand of Catherine's hair in place. "You must have made quite an impression." Katherine blushed. "He's been kind to me, that's all." Kathleen met her eyes in the mirror. "Kieran's kind to everyone, but he doesn't look at everyone the way he looks at you." Before Katherine could formulate a response, Kathleen stepped back to admire her work. "There. Simple but elegant. The blue brings out the gold in your eyes." Looking at her reflection, Katherine hardly recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked confident and at ease, a far cry from the exhausted, frightened creature who had stepped off the stagecoach 2 weeks ago. Her skin had already begun to tan from days in the mountain sun, giving her a healthy glow that complemented the simple blue dress. "Thank you," she said to Kathleen, "for everything." Kathleen squeezed her shoulder. "That's what friends are for." When Kieran arrived to escort her to the social, he paused in the doorway, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the admiration in his gaze making her cheeks warm. "Thank you," Katherine replied, equally appreciative of his clean white shirt and dark suit coat. His hair was still damp from washing, and he'd trimmed his beard, giving him a more polished appearance while still maintaining the rugged quality she'd come to associate with him. The church was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, tables laden with food along one wall, chairs and benches pushed to the sides to create space for dancing. Nearly everyone in Prosperity seemed to be in attendance, from small children to gray-haired elders. Katherine was aware of curious glances as they entered, but the reception was warmer than she'd expected. Many people greeted her by name, asking about the mine's progress or offering congratulations on her successful start. "Word travels fast," she murmured to Kieran as they made their way through the crowd. "Small towns," he agreed. "No secrets, but they respect success and hard work. You're proving yourself." The evening was more enjoyable than Katherine had anticipated. The food was plentiful and delicious, the company generally welcoming, and the music, while not as refined as Boston's orchestras, was lively and infectious. When Kieran led her onto the dance floor for a waltz, she discovered that he moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man. His hand was warm at her waist, his steps sure as he guided her through the turns. "You dance well," she observed, surprised. "My mother insisted," Kieran explained. "Said a gentleman should know how to dance, even on the frontier." She was right, Katherine smiled. As they moved together, Katherine was acutely aware of his proximity, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the strength in the hand that held hers. Something was growing between them, something unexpected but increasingly difficult to ignore. Later, as they took a break from dancing, Kathleen approached with a tall, dark-haired man in tow. "Katherine, you remember Dr. Wells," she said. "He's been asking about you." "Miss Blackwood," the doctor greeted her. "I treated your uncle during his illness. A good man." "Thank you for your care of him," Katherine replied sincerely. "I understand the mine is producing well," Dr. Wells continued. "Congratulations. Few women would have the courage to take on such an enterprise." "I had excellent help," Katherine acknowledged, glancing at Kieran. "Perhaps you'd honor me with the next dance?" the doctor asked. Katherine looked to Kieran, who nodded slightly. "Of course, Doctor." As they moved onto the dance floor, Katherine noticed Kathleen engaging her brother in animated conversation, their heads bent close together. "Your arrival has caused quite a stir in our little community," Dr. Wells remarked as they began to dance. He was competent but lacked Kieran's natural grace. "I imagine it's not often a woman arrives to claim a silver mine," Katherine replied. "It's not just that," the doctor said. "It's your effect on certain parties. Kieran Daniels hasn't shown interest in a woman since Mary Sullivan died, yet he's barely left your side since you arrived." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Daniels has been kind enough to help me navigate my new circumstances. We're friends, Doctor." Wells smiled knowingly. "If you say so, Miss Blackwood, but I've known Kieran for years, and I've never seen him look at a friend the way he looks at you." Katherine didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject, asking about the doctor's practice in prosperity. By the time the dance ended, they were discussing the need for better medical supplies in frontier towns. Kieran reclaimed her for the next dance, a lively reel that left little breath for conversation, but plenty of opportunity for shared smiles and laughter. As the evening progressed, Katherine found herself relaxing completely for the first time in months, the weight of her worries temporarily lifted by music and pleasant company. It was nearly midnight when they finally left the church, walking slowly back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Katherine said. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in a very long time." "I'm glad," Kieran replied. "You deserve some joy after all you've been through." They reached the boarding house steps, but neither seemed eager to end the evening. Katherine turned to face him, suddenly shy despite the ease they'd developed over the past weeks. "Will you be coming up to the mine tomorrow?" she asked. "If you'd like," Kieran said. "I thought you might want to attend church services first." "I'd like that," Katherine nodded. "And perhaps you could join me for Sunday dinner at the cabin afterward. It won't be fancy, but I make a decent stew." "I'd be honored," Kieran accepted. He hesitated, then reached out to take her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Katherine," he said softly, "I want you to know that my interest in you and your mine are separate things. I would have wanted to know you even if you'd arrived with nothing but the clothes on your back." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "I believe you," she whispered. "And I'm grateful for your friendship, Kieran, more than I can say." He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both old-fashioned and deeply affecting. "Good night, Katherine. Sleep well." "Good night," she replied, her voice not quite steady. As she prepared for bed in the room Kathleen had insisted she use for the night, Katherine's thoughts were a whirl of confusion and unexpected happiness. She had come west, seeking only survival and independence. She hadn't expected to find someone like Kieran Daniels, someone who saw beyond her circumstances to the woman she truly was. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect September Sunday. Katherine wore her green dress to church, where she received more welcoming nods than curious stares. Afterward, she and Kieran rode up to the mine, talking easily about the service and the people they'd met. At the cabin, Katherine prepared a simple but hearty stew while Kieran checked on the mine workings, ensuring all was secure for the day of rest. When he returned, they ate at the small table, the open door providing a view of mountains painted gold by the afternoon sun. "It's peaceful here," Kieran observed, looking out at the landscape. "Sometimes I think people who have never been west can't imagine the scale of it, how small it makes you feel, but in a good way." "I know what you mean," Katherine agreed. "In Boston, everything felt close, confined. Here, there's room to breathe." After the meal, they walked along the ridge above the mine, Kieran pointing out landmarks and naming distant peaks. When they reached a particularly spectacular viewpoint, they sat on a sun-warmed boulder, content to simply be in each other's company. "What will you do when the mine is established?" Kieran asked eventually. "Will you stay in prosperity?" Katherine considered the question. "I think so. There's nothing drawing me back east, and I'm beginning to feel at home here." She glanced at him. "What about you? Have you ever thought of leaving?" "Once or twice," Kieran admitted. "After Mary died, I considered heading further west, maybe to California. But the ranch was just getting established and Kathleen needed me." He shrugged. "Then time passed and prosperity became home. Do you ever regret it, not seeing more of the world?" Kieran's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Not lately," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, until a distant rumble of thunder broke the spell. Looking up, they saw dark clouds gathering over the western peaks. "Storm coming," Kieran said, rising to his feet. "We should head back." They made it to the cabin just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Within minutes, the sky had darkened completely, rain lashing against the windows as thunder echoed between the mountains. "Looks like I'm staying until this passes," Kieran observed, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Mountain storms can be fierce but usually blow through quickly." Katherine busied herself lighting the lamps against the premature darkness, acutely aware of how small the cabin seemed with Kieran's tall figure occupying so much of the space. Propriety suggested she should be concerned about being alone with him, but she felt only safety in his presence. They passed the time playing cards at the table, the rain creating a cozy backdrop to their conversation. Katherine found herself telling him about her childhood in Boston, the balls and parties that had once seemed so important, the expectations that had shaped her early years. "I was engaged once," she admitted. "To the son of my father's business partner. It was more a merger than a match." "What happened?" Kieran asked. "When father lost everything, Richard suddenly discovered we weren't suited after all," Katherine said dryly. "In retrospect, it was a fortunate escape, though it didn't feel that way at the time." "His loss," Kieran said simply. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the cabin's sturdy walls. A particularly loud crash of thunder made Katherine jump, and Kieran reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "Just the storm," he reassured her. "The cabin stood through worse." His touch lingered, warm and comforting, until another sound cut through the storm's fury, the urgent ringing of a bell. Kieran was on his feet instantly. "That's the mine alarm," he said, reaching for his hat and coat. "Something's wrong." Katherine grabbed her own coat, following him into the driving rain without hesitation. They ran toward the mine entrance, where a single figure was emerging from the darkness, ringing the emergency bell that hung by the tunnel mouth. It was Tom Bailey, soaked and mud-splattered. "Cave in," he shouted over the storm. "Down in the lower shaft, men trapped," Kieran demanded. "Peters and Gonzalez," Bailey confirmed. "They went down to check the supports during the storm. Water must have weakened something." "I'll go," Kieran said immediately, already moving toward the equipment shed. "I'm coming too," Katherine insisted, following him. Bailey and Kieran exchanged a glance, but neither argued as they gathered lanterns, ropes, and tools. Minutes later, they were descending into the main shaft, the storm's fury muted by layers of rock and earth. The going was slow, their path lit only by lanterns as they carefully made their way deeper into the mine. Katherine's heart pounded with fear, not for herself, but for the trapped men and for Kieran, who moved ahead with determined strides. They reached the cave-in after 20 minutes of careful descent. A wall of fallen rock blocked the tunnel completely. From beyond it, they could hear faint calls for help. "Peters, Gonzalez," Bailey shouted. "Can you hear me?" "We're here," came the muffled reply. Gonzalez is hurt but alive. We'll get you out, Kieran promised, already examining the blockage. How's the air in there? Getting thin, was the worrying response. And there's water seeping in. Kieran turned to Bailey. We need to create a stable opening without bringing down more rock. Start at the top, work our way down. For the next hour they worked in tense silence, carefully removing rocks one by one, passing them back along a human chain. Katherine worked alongside the men without complaint, her clothes soaked with sweat and grime, her hands raw from the rough stone. When a small opening finally appeared at the top of the pile, a cheer went up. Kieran enlarged it enough to pass through water and food to the trapped miners, then continued working to make the hole big enough for a person. Almost there, he encouraged as they removed a particularly large boulder. Just a bit more. Suddenly, there was a groan from the ceiling above them. Kieran looked up sharply. "Everyone back," he shouted. Now Katherine had just started to move when she saw a massive crack spreading across the tunnel ceiling directly above Kieran. Without thinking, she lunged forward, shoving him hard just as the rocks began to fall. Pain exploded in her shoulder as something struck her from behind. She heard Kieran shout her name, then darkness swallowed her whole. Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of pain, movement, voices calling her name. She felt herself being carried, rain on her face, then warmth and the softness of a bed. Someone was holding her hand, speaking urgently, but she couldn't make out the words as darkness claimed her again. When she finally opened her eyes fully, sunlight was streaming through the cabin window. Her shoulder and head throbbed with dull pain, and when she tried to move, a gentle hand restrained her. "Easy," Kieran's voice said from beside her. "You took a nasty hit." Katherine blinked, bringing his face into focus. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes red rimmed with exhaustion, clothes still dirty from the mine. "The miners," she croaked, her throat dry. "Safe," Kieran assured her, helping her take a sip of water. "Peters and Gonzalez are both recovering. Thanks to you, no one was killed." Memory returned in flashes: the storm, the cave-in, the cracking ceiling. "You could have been crushed," she murmured. "Instead, you nearly were," Kieran replied, his voice tight with emotion. "Katherine, what were you thinking? You could have died." "I wasn't thinking," she admitted. "I just couldn't bear the thought of losing you." The words hung between them, raw and honest. Kieran's expression softened, his hand tightening around hers. "Dr. Wells says you have a concussion and a badly bruised shoulder, but nothing's broken," he said after a moment. "He came up from town as soon as the storm cleared." "How long have I been unconscious?" "Most of the night," Kieran said. "It's Monday morning now." Katherine tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. "The mine is closed until we can properly assess the damage," Kieran said firmly. "Bailey's organizing repairs, but your health comes first." You need to rest," Kieran interrupted. "Doctor's orders, and mine." Something in his voice, a mixture of authority and concern, made Katherine subside against the pillows. "You stayed with me all night." "Of course I did," Kieran said softly. "I wasn't about to leave you." Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them, a barrier falling away, a truth acknowledged. "Katherine," Kieran began, his voice rough with emotion. "When I saw those rocks falling toward you, he broke off, struggling for words. "I realized I couldn't lose you, not when I've just found you." Katherine's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Kieran, let me finish," he said. "I know we've only known each other a few weeks. I know your life has been turned upside down, and the last thing you probably want is complications. But I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Blackwood. And if you'd give me the chance, I'd like to court you properly." Tears filled Katherine's eyes, not from pain but from a sudden, overwhelming joy. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. Because I think I'm falling in love with you too." Kieran's face transformed with happiness. Gently, mindful of her injuries, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a tender, questioning kiss. Katherine responded with a depth of feeling that surprised them both, her good arm reaching up to draw him closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "You should rest," he murmured reluctantly. "Stay with me," Katherine asked. "I'll be right here," he promised, settling into the chair beside her bed. As she drifted back to sleep, Katherine felt a sense of peace and rightness that transcended the pain of her injuries. She had come west seeking only survival and had found so much more purpose, community, and a love she had never expected. Over the next few days, Katherine recovered slowly under Kieran's watchful care. News from the mine was encouraging the damage was less extensive than feared, and repairs were progressing well. By the end of the week, Katherine was able to move around the cabin, though Dr. Wells insisted she avoid strenuous activity for at least another week. Kieran divided his time between his ranch and Katherine's cabin, bringing supplies, overseeing mine repairs, and keeping her company during her convalescence. Their relationship deepened with each passing day, conversations stretching late into the evening as they shared their histories, hopes, and dreams. "I've been thinking," Kieran said one evening as they sat on the cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains, "about the future." Katherine looked at him curiously. "What about it?" "My ranch is doing well," he said. "The mine is proving profitable. Between the two of us, we could build something substantial here. Are you proposing a business partnership, Mr. Daniels?" Katherine teased, though her heart beat faster at the direction of the conversation. Kieran took her hand, his expression serious. "I'm suggesting that someday when you're ready it could be more than that." "Someday," Katherine agreed softly, squeezing his hand. "When the time is right." That someday came sooner than either had anticipated. By December, the Silver Lady was producing consistently, the ore rich enough to attract attention from Denver investors. Katherine had moved back to town, taking permanent rooms at the boarding house for propriety's sake, though she still rode to the mine most days to oversee operations. Her relationship with Kieran had become the talk of prosperity, but the gossip was largely good-natured. The town had accepted her as one of their own, respecting her determination and business acumen. Even Victor Holloway had grudgingly acknowledged her success, though he still occasionally made overtures about buying her claim. On Christmas Eve, the town gathered for a celebration at the church. Pine boughs and red ribbons decorated the simple space, and candles cast a warm glow over the festivities. Katherine wore a new dress forest green wool that she'd been able to afford thanks to the mine's success, and a small silver pendant that had been her mother's. Kieran met her at the boarding house, handsome in his best suit, a wrapped package tucked under his arm. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Katherine smiled. "You're quite dashing yourself." The church was filled with music and laughter as they arrived. Children ran between the pews, excited about Santa's impending visit, while adults exchanged greetings and gifts. Kathleen waved them over to where she stood with Dr. Wells, their heads bent close together in conversation. "About time you two arrived," she said. "Dr. Wells Michael was just telling me about the new medical supplies that arrived on yesterday's stage." Katherine noticed the use of the doctor's first name and the way Kathleen's cheeks flushed when he smiled at her. It seemed romance was blooming in more than one corner of prosperity this Christmas. The evening passed in a blur of carols, stories, and delicious food. As midnight approached, many families with young children began to depart, leaving the celebration quieter and more intimate. "Would you walk with me?" Kieran asked Katherine as the church clock struck 11. "There's something I'd like to show you." Bundling up against the cold, they stepped out into a perfect Christmas Eve night. Snow had fallen earlier, covering Prosperity in a blanket of white that glittered under the moonlight. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air as Kieran led her toward the center of town. "Where are we going?" Katherine asked, curious. "You'll see," Kieran replied with a mysterious smile. They stopped in front of a building Katherine hadn't paid much attention to before, a two-story structure that had been vacant since she arrived in town. "What is this place?" she asked. "It used to be the land office," Kieran explained. "But it's been empty for over a year since they moved to larger premises." He produced a key from his pocket. "It's mine now, or it will be once the paperwork is finalized after the new year." Surprised, Katherine followed him inside. The front room was dusty but spacious, with large windows facing the street. "I thought it could be an office," Kieran continued, leading her through the building. "For the ranch and the mine, the Silver K Enterprise." "Silver K," Katherine repeated. "For Katherine and Kieran," he explained with a smile, "if you like the idea." "I do," she nodded. "But why do we need an office in town?" "Because I thought we might want to live above it," Kieran said, leading her up a staircase to the second floor. The upper level contained several rooms, a large living area, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a small study. Though unfurnished and in need of cleaning, Katherine could immediately see the potential. "It's perfect for a family," she said softly. "That's what I thought," Kieran agreed. He set down the package he'd been carrying and took both her hands in his. "Katherine, these past months have been the happiest of my life. When you stepped off that stagecoach in your tattered dress, I knew there was something special about you. I just didn't know you'd come to mean everything to me." Katherine's heart pounded as he sank to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I don't want to wait for someday anymore," he said. "I want to build a life with you now, combining our strengths, facing challenges together, creating something lasting. Katherine Blackwood, will you marry me?" Tears of joy sprang to Katherine's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Kieran Daniels." He rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. "I have something for you," Kieran said, retrieving the package he'd brought. "It's not much," but Katherine unwrapped it carefully, revealing a beautifully carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a silver ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," Kieran explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "Pa gave it to her when they decided to go west together. She always said it represented their adventure and their future." "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed, admiring how the diamond caught the moonlight streaming through the windows. "I'll treasure it always." They stood together in the empty rooms that would soon be their home, planning their future as snow fell gently outside. Katherine thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment, the loss and hardship, the fear and uncertainty, and finally, the joy of finding where she truly belonged. "They laughed when I stepped off that stagecoach in rags," she mused, looking up at the man who would soon be her husband. Kieran smiled, drawing her closer. "And I said you were rich enough for me. I was right, you know. You're the greatest treasure I could have found." "We're both rich," Katherine corrected him, "in all the ways that truly matter." As the church bells rang out midnight, announcing Christmas Day, they sealed their engagement with another kiss, their hearts full of love and the promise of the life they would build together, a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined when fate first brought them together in the wild frontier town of Prosperity. Katherine and Kieran were married on a bright spring day in May 1876, with wildflowers adorning the church and the entire town in attendance. Kathleen stood as Catherine's maid of honor, while Dr. Wells, now officially courting Kathleen, served as Kieran's best man. Katherine wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she'd ordered from Denver, a luxury she could now afford thanks to the mine's prosperity. Kieran, handsome in a new black suit, watched with undisguised adoration as she walked down the aisle to become his wife. Their honeymoon was a 2-week journey to Denver, where they attended the theater, dined in fine restaurants, and purchased furniture for their new home above the office. Katherine, who had once moved in Boston's highest social circles, found herself far happier in her new life than she had ever been in the old one. Upon their return to prosperity, they settled into a routine that combined business and pleasure. Mornings were spent in their office, managing the growing enterprises of both the ranch and the mine. Afternoons often found them riding out to one property or the other, working alongside their employees, building something lasting together. The Silver Lady continued to produce rich ore, and under Bailey's capable management, expanded operations to employ 15 men. Kieran's ranch prospered as well, his cattle bringing top prices at market. As summer turned to fall, Katherine discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought joy not only to the couple but to the entire town, which had embraced them as one of prosperity's success stories. "I hope it's a girl with your eyes," Kieran said one evening as they sat on the porch of their town home, watching the sunset. "I was thinking a boy with your strength and kindness," Katherine countered, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Either way, the child will be loved," Kieran said, covering her hand with his own. "And raised to know that true value isn't in clothes or possessions," Katherine added, thinking of the lesson she'd learned that fateful day when she'd arrived in prosperity. As winter settled over Colorado, Katherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her west. The loss of her father and her former life had seemed like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning of something far more precious, a life built on love, mutual respect, and shared purpose. Victor Holloway eventually left prosperity, having failed to consolidate the mining claims as he'd hoped. Tom Bailey continued as foreman of the Silver Lady, eventually buying a small interest in the mine that gave him a stake in its success. Kathleen and Dr. Wells announced their engagement at Christmas, planning a summer wedding that would make them officially family. In April 1877, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Mary Daniels Elizabeth, for Katherine's mother, and Mary for the woman Kieran had once loved. The baby had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, evident even in her first days of life. "She's perfect," Kieran whispered as he held his daughter for the first time, his voice thick with emotion. "She is," Katherine agreed, watching the two people she loved most in the world, "our greatest treasure." As Elizabeth grew, so did the family's enterprises. The Silver K, as their combined businesses became known throughout the territory, expanded to include interests in the railroad, timber, and eventually, a bank that served the needs of the growing community. Katherine never forgot the lessons of her arrival in prosperity, how appearances could deceive, how true worth lay in character rather than clothing, and how the richest life wasn't measured in dollars, but in love and purpose. She made sure these values were instilled in Elizabeth and in the son, Jacob Kieran, who joined their family 2 years later. On the 5th anniversary of her arrival in Colorado, Katherine stood with Kieran on the ridge above the Silver Lady mine, the same spot where they had sat during that Sunday afternoon storm that had nearly claimed both their lives but had instead cemented their love. "You ever regret it?" Kieran asked as they looked out over the valley. Leaving Boston, coming west, Katherine smiled, slipping her hand into his. Not for a single moment. Everything I truly needed was waiting for me here. I just didn't know it when I stepped off that stagecoach. You arrived in rags, Kieran reminisced, and now you're one of the wealthiest women in the territory. The rags never mattered, Katherine reminded him. You said I was rich enough for you even then. Because you were, Kieran said, drawing her into his arms. You still are. You always will be. As the sun set over the mountains they both loved, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found something far more valuable than silver in the mines of Colorado. She had found her true home and the love of her life. Treasures beyond price that would endure long after the last ore cart had been emptied from the Silver Lady's depths. In the years that followed, Prosperity continued to live up to its name, growing from a mining camp into a proper town with schools, churches, and amenities that rivaled those of much larger settlements. The Daniels family remained at its heart, their story becoming part of local legend, how a woman had arrived in rags, but had proven her worth through courage and determination, and how a cowboy had seen her true value when others had only mocked. It was a story they told their grandchildren in later years, a reminder that life's greatest riches aren't always visible to the eye, but are discovered by those wise enough to look beyond appearances to the heart within.